Before the snap, they knew exactly where he was. It rarely mattered. One blocker could be thrown aside, send another, and Reggie White could still find his way through. And once number 92 broke into the backfield, quarterbacks had only seconds to escape. They called him the Minister of Defense. In Philadelphia, it sounded less like a nickname and more like a warning. The Eagles had a generational defender in his prime. Around him, they would build a defense that terrified offenses and left its mark on NFL history. But it never brought Philadelphia a Super Bowl. And then came the part that once seemed unthinkable. Number 92 was gone. Not because his dominance had disappeared, not because his greatest days were clearly behind him. Reggie White still had greatness ahead of him. And what he accomplished after leaving Philadelphia would make his departure impossible to forget. So how did the Eagles have one of the most feared defenders the NFL had ever seen, and then watch him walk away? This is the Eagles Chronicles. Subscribe for more stories from Eagles history, because the story of how Philadelphia lost Reggie White begins with the remarkable way they got him in the first place. The star Philadelphia had to wait for. Long before Philadelphia knew what number 92 would become, Reggie White was already building a reputation that was becoming impossible to ignore. Raised in Chattanooga, Tennessee, White carried two things with him everywhere: an extraordinary gift for football and a deeply rooted Christian faith. He began preaching while still a teenager, and before long, the two sides of his identity gave him a nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life: the Minister of Defense. At the University of Tennessee, White became far more than a promising defensive lineman. He became one of the most disruptive players in the country, combining the strength of an interior lineman with the quickness to attack from the edge. By the end of his college career, NFL teams knew exactly what kind of talent was coming. But Reggie White wasn't going to enter the NFL the normal way. Instead, he signed with the Memphis Showboats of the United States Football League. And that created an unusual opportunity for Philadelphia. In 1984, with White already committed to the USFL, the Eagles used the NFL's supplemental draft of USFL and CFL players to secure his NFL rights. They had drafted a potential superstar they couldn't actually put on the field. So, Philadelphia waited. White spent 2 seasons in Memphis, playing professional football while the USFL fought for its place in an increasingly uncertain future. But when the league's troubles began pulling him toward the NFL, the Eagles weren't about to receive an inexperienced rookie. They were about to receive a professional defender who had already spent 2 seasons learning how to overpower grown men. In 1985, the wait finally ended. Reggie White was coming to Philadelphia. And it wouldn't take long for the Eagles to realize they hadn't simply acquired another defensive lineman. They had acquired a force. When number 92 arrived, when Reggie White finally joined the Eagles in 1985, the season was already underway. There was no training camp to ease him in, no full offseason to learn the NFL game. He arrived during the season and immediately began changing the game around him. In just 13 games, White recorded 13 sacks, but the numbers only captured the result. Watching him explained the problem. Reggie had the size to absorb contact, the speed to close on a quarterback, and the strength to turn an offensive lineman's own body against him. There was no obvious weakness a tackle could prepare for. And then there was the move that became his signature, the hump move. White would engage a blocker, use his leverage and extraordinary upper body power, then redirect him out of the rushing lane. Tackles who were supposed to protect the quarterback could suddenly find themselves thrown sideways as number 92 crashed into the backfield. It wasn't subtle. And once White had the advantage, there was often very little time to recover. That was what made blocking him so difficult. Set too aggressively for his power, and he had the quickness to exploit it. Prepare for his movement, and he could simply overwhelm you. Even sending a second blocker didn't guarantee the quarterback would stay clean. Philadelphia had waited more than a year for Reggie White to arrive,
It took only one season to realize the wait had been worth it. This wasn't a promising young defender the Eagles hoped might eventually become special. They were watching the beginning of something much bigger, a player capable of becoming the foundation of an entire defense. And in 1986, Philadelphia brought in a coach who knew exactly what to do with a weapon like that. His name was Buddy Ryan.
Buddy Ryan built a monster. In 1986, the Eagles handed their team to a coach who had built his reputation on making offenses uncomfortable. Buddy Ryan had just helped construct the Chicago Bears defense that overwhelmed the NFL on its way to a Super Bowl championship. Now he was in Philadelphia, and waiting for him was Reggie White. Buddy didn't need Reggie to become the heart of his defense. He already was. What Ryan did was begin building an identity that matched him: aggressive, physical, relentless, and never interested in letting an offense feel comfortable. Philadelphia wouldn't sit back and wait for mistakes. The Eagles wanted to create them. And slowly, the pieces began appearing around number 92. Clyde Simmons developed into a dangerous threat on the opposite side. Seth Joyner brought speed and violence at linebacker. Jerome Brown arrived in 1987 and gave the defensive front another explosive force offenses couldn't ignore. Eric Allen brought playmaking ability to the secondary, while Andre Waters gave it an intimidating edge. Now, blocking Reggie White wasn't the only problem. If an offense committed extra protection to number 92, somebody else could come free. If a quarterback held the football, the pocket could collapse from somewhere else. And behind that pressure waited defenders who could turn one bad decision into a turnover. Philadelphia was becoming a miserable place for opposing offenses. Before long, the defense had an identity of its own: Gang Green. It fit the city, it fit Buddy Ryan, and above all, it fit a group that seemed to feed on confrontation. The Eagles weren't simply trying to stop offenses anymore. They wanted offenses to feel them, snap after snap, quarter after quarter. At the center of it all was Reggie White. For the first time since he arrived, Philadelphia wasn't simply watching an extraordinary defender dominate on his own. It was beginning to surround him with a defense capable of amplifying everything that made him dangerous. And that changed the expectations. Because once a defense becomes this talented, surviving Sundays is no longer enough. Eventually, people start thinking about January, about playoff runs, about championships. Philadelphia was assembling a defense that looked capable of taking them there. But before the Eagles could discover how far that defense could carry them, Reggie White was about to show the NFL just how terrifying his peak could be. The year Reggie became unstoppable. By 1987, the question was no longer whether Reggie White was special. The question was whether anyone in the NFL could consistently stop him. It was a strange season, shortened and disrupted by a players' strike. White appeared in only 12 games. For most players, fewer games would have meant fewer chances to leave a mark. Reggie somehow made those 12 games feel like enough. He finished with 21 sacks in just 12 games, nearly 2 sacks per game. Offenses could identify number 92 before the snap. They could change protection. They could put another blocker in his path, and too often, none of it changed the ending. One afternoon against Washington captured the nightmare perfectly. White tore through the protection for 4.5 sacks. It wasn't one breakdown or one tackle having a bad snap. The problem kept returning. Number 92 kept returning. Every adjustment seemed to create another problem. Give White space, and he could attack with speed. Meet him with strength, and he could overwhelm it. Lean too hard in one direction, and his hump move could send a blocker out of the play entirely. By the end of the season, Reggie wasn't simply the best defender in Philadelphia. He had become one of the most dominant players in football, earning NFL Defensive Player of the Year honors and forcing the rest of the league to understand what the Eagles already knew. Reggie White wasn't becoming the Minister of Defense. He had arrived. But Philadelphia wanted more than sacks, awards, and terrified quarterbacks, because around Reggie, something bigger was beginning to take shape. The Eagles believed they were building a team made for January, and soon they would finally get the chance to find out. The window that kept closing. By 1988, Philadelphia was no longer simply building something dangerous. The Eagles looked ready to contend. Reggie White anchored a feared defense. Randall Cunningham gave the offense an electric playmaker at quarterback, and Buddy Ryan finally had Philadelphia back in the postseason as NFC East champions. Then came Chicago. The divisional playoff became the infamous Fog Bowl, with a thick wall of fog swallowing Soldier Field and turning one of Philadelphia's biggest games into one of the strangest in NFL history. The Eagles returned to the playoffs in 1989, only to lose to the Rams. A year later, Washington ended their season in Philadelphia. 3 straight playoff appearances, 3 straight exits, no postseason victory. The defense could terrorize opponents. Randall Cunningham could produce moments few quarterbacks could match, but somehow all that talent still hadn't become a championship team. After the 1990 season, Buddy Ryan was fired. The coach who had helped build the Eagles into one of football's most intimidating teams was gone. Reggie White was still there, and somehow the defense was about to become even better. A great defense with nowhere to go. Buddy Ryan was gone, but the defense he helped build wasn't finished. In 1991, Rich Kotite took over as head coach, with veteran defensive mastermind Bud Carson overseeing a unit loaded with talent. Then, almost immediately, Philadelphia's season changed. In Week 1, Randall Cunningham suffered a season-ending knee injury. The Eagles had lost the quarterback who could turn a broken play into something extraordinary. If Philadelphia was going anywhere now, its defense would have to carry an enormous burden. And somehow it became even more dominant. With Reggie White and Clyde Simmons attacking from the edges, Jerome Brown collapsing the middle, Seth Joyner roaming behind them, and Eric Allen making plays in the secondary, Gang Green reached its terrifying peak. The Eagles finished number 1 in the NFL in total defense, number 1 against the run, and number 1 against the pass, a rare sweep that placed the unit among the great defenses of its era. Opponents weren't simply struggling to score. Moving the football itself became a battle, and at the center of it was number 92, the force offenses had spent years trying to solve. Yet this is what made 1991 so cruel. Philadelphia finished 10-6 and missed the playoffs. One of the greatest defenses the Eagles had ever assembled never played a single postseason snap that year. Reggie White was in his prime. Gang Green had reached its peak, but another season capable of becoming something historic ended before January even began. And then football suddenly became secondary, because before the Eagles could bring that defense back for another run, they would lose something far more important than a season. The loss that changed everything. Before the Eagles could make another run, tragedy changed the meaning of everything that came next. On June 25, 1992, Jerome Brown died in a car crash in Florida. He was just 27 years old. Brown had been more than another piece of Gang Green. He was an all-pro force beside Reggie White and one of Reggie's closest friends. Together, they had helped give Philadelphia's defensive front its identity. Now, suddenly, number 99 was gone. The Eagles weren't simply trying to replace an elite defensive tackle. They were entering 1992 without a teammate and friend who had been at the heart of their rise. Still, Philadelphia pushed forward. The Eagles returned to the playoffs and defeated New Orleans 36-20 in the wildcard round, their first postseason victory since Super Bowl 15 following the 1980 season, and the first of Reggie White's Eagles career. For once, January didn't end immediately, but the breakthrough didn't last.
A week later, the eventual champion Dallas Cowboys eliminated Philadelphia in the divisional round, and with that, an era was nearing its end. Not just because the defense was changing, the entire NFL was about to change with it.
The case that changed the NFL. For years, the Eagles had worried about building a championship team around Reggie White. By the end of 1992, the question was becoming very different. Could they keep him? NFL free agency didn't work then the way it does today. Teams had far greater control over veteran players, and the league system made true freedom of movement difficult. Reggie White wasn't willing to accept that system quietly. He became the lead plaintiff in White versus NFL, a landmark antitrust case brought by NFL players challenging the restrictions on free agency. In 1992, a federal court ruling strengthened the player's position, and the legal battle helped lead to the 1993 settlement between the players and the league, paving the way for the modern era of unrestricted free agency. White hadn't simply become one of football's most dominant defenders. He had helped fight for the right to choose where he would play, and now that right was about to change his relationship with Philadelphia forever. For 8 seasons, number 92 had been the centerpiece of the Eagles' defense. But in 1993, Reggie White could finally listen to other teams, weigh his future, and make a decision Philadelphia could no longer control. The Eagles had spent years trying to win with Reggie White. Now, for the first time, they faced the possibility of losing him. And then they lost him. In 1993, the possibility Philadelphia had spent years avoiding became real. Reggie White was an unrestricted free agent. He was 31 years old, but teams weren't pursuing him as a legend looking for somewhere to finish his career. They believed he could still change a defense. For the first time, White could listen to them all, and he did. His free agent journey became one of the NFL's first major recruiting battles. White visited teams and considered more than football alone. His Christian faith was central to his life, and he publicly spoke about wanting to go where he believed God was leading him. But wherever he landed, there also had to be a future worth believing in. Then came Green Bay. The Packers were trying to rebuild themselves into contenders. General manager Ron Wolf was reshaping the roster, Mike Holmgren was building the team, and a young Brett Favre had begun giving the franchise hope. Green Bay wasn't the obvious destination for the NFL's biggest new free agent. That was exactly why signing him would mean so much. The Packers made their case, and in April 1993, Reggie made his decision. 4 years, $17 million. Green Bay. Just like that, number 92 belonged to somebody else. The Eagles hadn't simply discarded Reggie White. The NFL's rules had changed. White had fought for the freedom to choose, and Green Bay gave him a reason to make that choice. But none of that made the loss easier in Philadelphia. After 8 seasons, one of the greatest defenders ever to wear an Eagles uniform was walking away. And the most painful part? Reggie White was nowhere near finished. He changed Green Bay. Reggie White's decision didn't simply take a superstar away from Philadelphia. It sent a message across the NFL. Green Bay was a small market franchise that had spent much of the previous 2 decades outside the league's elite. It wasn't the kind of destination people automatically expected the biggest name in a new era of free agency to choose. Then, Reggie chose it. His arrival gave the Packers something beyond an elite pass rusher. It gave Ron Wolf and Mike Holmgren credibility. If Reggie White was willing to bet the next chapter of his career on Green Bay, other players could look at the Packers differently too. And on the field, he was still exactly what the Packers had paid for. As Brett Favre and the offense developed, White helped give the Packers a defensive force capable of matching their ambitions. Green Bay wasn't simply becoming relevant again, it was becoming a contender. Meanwhile, Philadelphia was moving into a different era, with the great gang green defense beginning to break apart. That was what made White's departure hurt. The Eagles weren't watching an aging legend quietly finish his career somewhere else. They were watching number 92 help another franchise build the championship team Philadelphia had once hoped to build around him. The ending Philadelphia never saw.
By the 1996 season, Reggie White was 35 years old, and he was finally one victory away from something that had always escaped him in Philadelphia: a championship. Green Bay reached Super Bowl 31 against the New England Patriots, and on football's biggest stage, number 92 showed that age hadn't taken away his ability to change a game. With the Packers protecting their lead in the second half, White took over. He brought down Drew Bledsoe twice on consecutive plays, then added another sack later in the fourth quarter. 3 sacks in one Super Bowl, a single-game Super Bowl record at the time. When the clock finally ran out, Green Bay had won 35-21. Reggie White was a Super Bowl champion. For 8 seasons, Philadelphia had watched him terrorize quarterbacks while chasing this exact moment. But the celebration never came in Eagles green. It came in Green Bay. And for Philadelphia, that leaves one question history can never fully answer. What if number 92 had never left?
What Philadelphia really lost? So what did the Eagles actually lose when Reggie White walked away? Not simply a pass rusher. From 1985 through 1992, White recorded 124 sacks in 121 regular season games for Philadelphia, still the most in Eagles history. He reached 6 straight Pro Bowls as an Eagle and was repeatedly recognized among the NFL's elite defenders. But numbers only explain part of what disappeared. Reggie had become the face of an era, the centerpiece of gangrene, and the player opposing offenses had to account for on every passing down. His presence helped define what Eagles' defense was supposed to feel like: aggressive, physical, and feared. Philadelphia eventually retired number 92. White would enter the Eagles Hall of Fame and, in 2006, the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Those honors preserved the legacy, but they also underlined what Philadelphia once possessed. The Eagles didn't lose a defender hoping his best years were still ahead of him. They lost an Eagles legend who had already become one of the most dominant defensive players the game had ever seen.
The question Philadelphia can never answer. And that is where Reggie White's Eagles story leaves behind one question that no statistic can answer. What if he had stayed? Could Philadelphia have rebuilt around number 92 as the rest of gangrene began to disappear? Could his presence have changed the direction of the Eagles through the mid-1990s? And could the championship he eventually won in Green Bay somehow have happened in Philadelphia instead? Maybe, but football history is filled with championships that only exist in the imagination. Keeping Reggie wouldn't have guaranteed Philadelphia anything. Different coaches, different rosters, different decisions, all of it would have changed what came next. What we do know is far more powerful. Reggie White left Philadelphia with greatness still in him, and the Eagles would spend the rest of his career knowing exactly what they had lost. So how did the Eagles lose a player like Reggie White? There was no single moment and no simple answer. Philadelphia was changing. The NFL was changing. Reggie had helped players win a freedom they had never truly possessed before, and when the opportunity came, he used it. What made the loss endure was what happened next. Reggie didn't fade away. He kept dominating. He helped change the direction of Green Bay, and eventually he became a champion. But before Green Bay, before the Super Bowl ring, and before his place in Canton was secured, Reggie White belonged to Philadelphia. In his prime, number 92 stood at the center of one of the most feared defenses football had seen. Opponents knew where he was before every snap, just as they had learned years earlier. Knowing was never the same as stopping him. Philadelphia had the minister of defense, and that's what made losing him unforgettable. You're watching the Eagles Chronicles, where we preserve the players, teams, triumphs, and painful turning points that shaped Eagles history. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and tell us in the comments. If Reggie White had stayed in Philadelphia, do you think the Eagles could have eventually won a championship with him?